12 German shepherds sat locked in rusted iron cages, their bodies pressed against cold metal bars, their chests heaving with something that wasn't quite breathing. It was the sound of breaking. Military working dogs, heroes who had cleared IED-laced compounds in Fallujah, who had taken bullets meant for Marines, who had dragged wounded operators out of kill zones with their teeth clamped around tactical vests. Dogs with more confirmed saves than most infantry squads, now catalogued as biological surplus, item numbers printed on auction sheets distributed to men who measured worth in pounds of muscle and pedigree certifications. The buyers moved between the cages like sharks testing chum. Dog fighters from Kentucky evaluated jaw strength and scarring patterns. A man in expensive boots representing a pharmaceutical research facility checked dental records and age estimates. Two brothers who ran an underground breeding operation in Nevada were already negotiating split custody of the females. Nobody was there to save them. Nobody was there to fight for them. Until a Marine sergeant with a red braid coiled tight against her skull and a scar running from her left temple to her jawline walked through the chain-link gate, looked at what was happening, and said 6 words that detonated the entire operation. "I am taking all these retired K9 dogs." No one expected what happened next. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. Let's see how far this journey takes us together. Sergeant Phoebe Castellano heard the dogs before she saw the facility. Not barking, whimpering, the kind of sound that doesn't come from animals who are confused or frightened or even angry. The kind that comes from creatures who understand abandonment, who recognize betrayal in a language older than words. She'd heard that exact sound once before, 3 years ago in a firebase outside Sangin, coming from a Belgian Malinois named Ranger, whose handler had been killed by sniper fire during a routine patrol. The dog had refused to leave the spot where the Marine had fallen, had stayed there for 14 hours, through a dust storm and incoming mortar fire, waiting for a man who would never stand up again. Phoebe had been the one to finally coax Ranger away, speaking in the low, steady cadence the handler had used, using the commands he'd taught the dog in training. She'd carried that sound in her ribcage ever since, that specific frequency of loss, and now it was pouring out of a military auction facility 40 minutes outside Camp Pendleton. Her phone had vibrated at 3:47 that morning. Unknown number, single message. "They're liquidating the K9 program. All of them, today, Fort Marston Disposition Yard. Come now if you're who I think you are." She'd stared at the screen for 90 seconds, her heart rate climbing with each passing second. Then she'd grabbed her keys, pulled her hair into the tight combat bun that had become automatic after 8 years of service, and driven 2 hours and 43 minutes without stopping once. Her hands had gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went bone white. The sunrise came up blood-red over the Pacific, staining the highway the color of warning. Phoebe had tried not to think about the last time she'd seen Tommy. Tommy, Kenneth's dog, Kenneth's boy. 76 pounds of black and tan loyalty, a German shepherd who had worked 4 deployments as an explosives detection specialist, who had a confirmed count of 19 IEDs located and disabled, who had been rated exceptional in every performance review, who had never missed a target, never failed a certification, who had been standing 3 feet away when Kenneth took the hit. It had been an ambush outside Mosul. Bad intelligence, faulty equipment, a tactical vest that was supposed to be rated for 7.62 rounds but had failed catastrophically when it mattered most. Kenneth had gone down hard, and Tommy had gone ballistic, attacking the shooter with such ferocity that the rest of the squad had time to establish cover and call for medevac. Kenneth had died before the helicopter arrived. Tommy had been right there, blood on his muzzle, Kenneth's hands still tangled in his tactical harness. Phoebe had made a promise that day, kneeling in the dirt beside Kenneth's body while the medevac rotors screamed overhead and Tommy shook so hard his tags rattled. She'd looked into those dark canine eyes and sworn, "I will look after your boy. I will make sure he's okay." That was 18 months ago. 6 weeks ago, she'd submitted adoption paperwork for Tommy. The response had come back stamped in red: disposition pending, animal unfit for continued service or adoption. Unfit, Tommy, a dog who had saved more lives than most field medics. The paperwork had listed behavioral instability, chronic aggression, medical contraindications for civilian placement. None of it made sense. Phoebe had filed 3 appeals, contacted the K-9 program coordinator, reached out to Kenneth's family, called in favors from officers who owed her. Every door had slammed shut. Every inquiry had been redirected to automated responses and bureaucratic dead ends. Until the text message at 3:47. Now Phoebe was standing outside the Fort Marston disposition yard, and the sounds coming from inside the corrugated metal building were making her hands curl into fists. She pushed through the gate. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Industrial-grade kennel cleaner trying to mask the sharp, acrid stench of stress hormones. The smell of fear, concentrated and immediate. The smell of every bad place Phoebe had ever been, field hospitals and ambush sites, and the transport bay where they'd loaded Kenneth's flag-draped casket. The second thing that hit her was the number. 12. 12 German shepherds locked in transport cages, arranged in 2 parallel rows of 6. Some were packing in tight, obsessive circles, their claws scraping against metal flooring. Some were pressed flat against the backs of their cages, eyes glassy, breathing rapid and shallow, the canine version of a dissociative state. Some were sitting perfectly still in trained, alert positions, waiting for commands that would never come. And around them, circling like vultures, 40, maybe 50 people, civilians in clothing that screamed money or screamed violence or screamed both. A man with neck tattoos and scarred knuckles was testing the gate latch on one cage, muttering to his associate about fight conditioning and natural aggression training. A woman in a white lab coat was photographing ear tattoos and scanning microchips with a handheld reader, her face utterly clinical. 2 men near the back were arguing in low voices about breeding rights and stud fees and genetic lineage documentation. Phoebe's vision tunneled. Then she saw him. Cage number 7, second row, third from the left. Tommy. He was thinner than she remembered. His coat had lost its sheen, and there was a tremor in his hindquarters that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had watched Kenneth die, locked onto Phoebe the instant she stepped into the building. His ears came forward, his whole body went rigid. And then he made a sound Phoebe had never heard from him before, not a bark, not a whine. A cry, high and desperate and human. Something inside Phoebe's chest cracked clean through. She didn't remember crossing the room, didn't remember pushing past the buyers, didn't remember her boots hitting the concrete or her hand slamming down on Tommy's cage hard enough to make the metal sing. She only remembered the auctioneer, a thin man in a cheap suit with a clipboard and a microphone, turning to look at her with irritation already forming on his face. And she remembered her own voice, loud enough to cut through every conversation in the building, hard enough to stop every transaction cold. I am taking all these retired K-9 dogs, every single one. The room went silent. Tommy pressed his face against the bars. And Phoebe Castellano, United States Marine Corps, survivor of 3 deployments and carrier of one very specific guilt, stared down an auction yard full of predators and did not blink once. Welcome to our channel. This story is about to get intense. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you want to see these villains get what's coming to them? Let us know in the comments. Phoebe had met Tommy on a Tuesday in August, 4 years ago, at a forward operating base outside Mosul, where the heat hit 118 degrees and stayed there like punishment. Kenneth had walked into the operations tent with the German shepherd at his heel, both of them moving with the synchronized precision of a single organism. Kenneth was grinning, sunburned, 23 years old, and convinced he was immortal. Tommy's tail was up, his ears were forward. And his eyes were scanning the room with the focused intensity of a trained professional. Castellano, Kenneth had said, dropping into the chair beside her. Meet the best damn explosives detection specialist in the Corps. Tommy had looked at her then, really looked, the way working dogs do when they're evaluating whether you're worth their attention. Phoebe had extended her hands slowly, palm down. Tommy had sniffed once, twice, then sat down and leaned his weight against her leg. Kenneth had laughed. He likes you, that's rare. It had taken 3 weeks for Phoebe to understand what Kenneth meant. Tommy didn't like people. Tommy worked with people, but with Phoebe, something was different. When Kenneth was out on patrol, Tommy would wait by her bunk. When she ran the perimeter at 500, Tommy would pace beside her if Kenneth let him off leash. When she sat alone in the mess tent reading letters from home, Tommy would rest his head on her boot. He's picking his pack, Kenneth had explained one night, cleaning his rifle while Tommy dozed between them. Dogs don't love conditionally, they just love, and once you're in forever. Phoebe had reached down to scratch behind Tommy's ears. What happens if something happens to you? Kenneth had looked up, his expression suddenly serious. Then you're his person, that's how it works. They'd both laughed it off, made jokes about Kenneth being indestructible, about Tommy probably outliving them all, about what they'd do when they got home. 16 months later, they were moving through a disputed neighborhood on the western edge of the city. Routine patrol, standard clearance operation. Kenneth and Tommy were on point, checking doorways and blind corners with the practiced efficiency of 100 previous missions. The ambush came from a second-story window. Phoebe saw the muzzle flash before she heard the crack of the rifle, saw Kenneth's body jerk backward, saw him hit the ground hard, saw the tactical vest. The new tactical vest they'd been issued 3 weeks earlier, the one manufactured by some private contractor whose name Phoebe didn't know yet, failed completely as the round punched straight through. Tommy went nuclear, 80 pounds of fury launching himself through the window where the shooter was already chambering another round. Snarling, tearing, buying the squad precious seconds to take cover and return fire. By the time they secured the building and called for medevac, Kenneth was already gone. Tommy had crawled back to Kenneth's body and refused to move, blood matted in his fur, Kenneth's hand still tangled in his harness. Phoebe had knelt in the dust beside them both, her hands shaking, her vision blurred. She'd looked into Tommy's eyes, those dark, devastated eyes, and made the promise. I will look after your boy. I will make sure he's okay. Tommy had pressed his head against her chest and stayed there while they loaded Kenneth onto the helicopter. That was the day Phoebe Castellano became responsible for a promise she didn't know how to keep. The auctioneer's face cycled through confusion, then irritation, then something that looked like nervous calculation. He glanced toward the back of the building, where a man in a dress uniform stood half hidden in shadow, arms crossed, watching. Ma'am, this is a sanctioned military disposition auction, the auctioneer said, his voice climbing an octave. You can't just. I'm not asking permission. Phoebe's voice cut through the building like a blade. These dogs are military assets being illegally auctioned to civilians. I'm invoking Article 108 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, military property, wrongful sale, or disposition. The man in the shadows stepped forward. Commander Sealers moved like someone accustomed to controlling rooms. 60 years old, silver eagles on his collar, a face carved from granite and political ambition. He'd never deployed, Phoebe knew that much. Had spent his entire career behind desks, managing budgets and contracts, and the kind of paperwork that kept wars running smoothly from climate-controlled offices. Sergeant Castellano, his voice was smooth, practiced. I wasn't aware you'd been invited to this proceeding. I wasn't aware we were in the business of selling heroes to dog fighters, sir. Sealers smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. These animals have been evaluated by qualified veterinary professionals and deemed unsuitable for continued military service or civilian adoption. Their disposition is being handled according to proper protocols. Protocols? Phoebe took 3 steps forward, close enough to see the calculation in Silas's expression. Tommy was rated exceptional in every performance review, 19 confirmed IED detections, 0 failures, and now he's suddenly unsuitable. The dog exhibited severe behavioral instability following his handler's death. Aggression, refusal to work with new handlers, psychological trauma that made him a liability. He's grieving. Phoebe's voice dropped to something dangerous. You're liquidating a dog because he mourned his partner. Silas's jaw tightened. Sentiment doesn't factor into military readiness assessments, Sergeant. These animals represent a significant financial burden. Feeding, housing, medical care for dogs who can no longer perform their functions. The auction recovers some of the taxpayer investment while lining whose pockets? Phoebe gestured to the buyers around them. These men aren't adopting family pets. That one's from a fighting ring in Louisville. That woman's purchasing officer for a pharmaceutical testing facility. You're not recovering investments, Commander. You're selling evidence. Something flickered across Silas's face. Just for a second, fear maybe, or recognition that she knew more than she should. You're out of line, Sergeant. Kenneth died because his tactical vest failed. The vest your office approved for procurement. The vest manufactured by a contractor whose name keeps showing up in your financial disclosures. Phoebe's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the building. And now, you're getting rid of the only witnesses who were there when it happened. Dogs who can't testify, dogs who can't contradict whatever story you've been selling. Silas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. You're making serious accusations without evidence. That's a career-ending mistake. Phoebe met his eyes and didn't blink. Then I guess we'll both find out what I'm willing to lose. Phoebe found the veterinarian in a supply closet behind the auction building, crying into her hands. The woman looked up when the door opened, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing surgical scrubs with the Veterinary Corps insignia on the shoulder. Her name tape read Dr. L. Chen, but Phoebe would later learn everyone called her Lily. You shouldn't be back here, Lily said, wiping her face quickly. Neither should 12 military working dogs be in cages waiting to get sold to research labs. Phoebe closed the door behind her. You signed their disposition reports. Every single one lists behavioral instability as the primary reason for early retirement. Lily's face crumpled. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not when a commander threatens your career, your license, and implies your family might have trouble with their security clearances if you don't cooperate. Lily stood up, her hands shaking. I've been a military veterinarian for 9 years. I've treated combat injuries, performed field surgeries, saved dogs who had no business surviving. And then Silas walked into my office 3 months ago with a stack of files and told me exactly what I was going to write. Phoebe's stomach turned. What's really wrong with them? Lily pulled a tablet from her bag, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Physical injuries, chronic pain, joint damage. Tommy has a fractured vertebra that never healed properly because the tactical harness he wore during that ambush was manufactured with substandard materials. The weight distribution was wrong, the stress points were wrong, everything was wrong. He's been in pain for 18 months. The words hit Phoebe like incoming fire. The other dogs she managed. Similar issues, bad equipment, faulty harnesses that damaged spines and hips, defective protective vests that didn't distribute impact properly, boots that caused nerve damage. Every single one of these dogs has documented physical trauma that can be directly traced back to gear failures. Lily's voice was shaking now, anger cutting through the fear. And every single injury points to the same manufacturer, Thorne Defense Solutions. Phoebe knew that name, Victor Thorne, the CEO whose company had a $60 million contract with the Department of Defense for tactical equipment. The CEO whose financial records showed regular payments to a consulting firm owned by Commander Silas's brother-in-law. They're not retiring these dogs because of behavioral problems, Lily continued, pulling up x-rays and medical scans on her tablet. They're retiring them because they're evidence, living, breathing proof that Thorne's equipment is defective and dangerous. Kenneth wasn't the only handler who died because of gear failure. There have been 6 others in the past 2 years, but dogs don't testify in court. Dogs don't file complaints. Dogs just disappear into auctions and nobody asks questions. Phoebe looked at the scan of Tommy's spine, at the visible fracture line, at the evidence of chronic pain. "I need copies of everything," she said quietly. Lily met her eyes. "If I do this, my career is over. If you don't, 12 dogs die and the people responsible keep killing Marines." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled a thumb drive from her pocket. "I've been waiting for someone to ask. Commander Sealers and Victor Thorne are running a scam that treats heroes like garbage just to line their pockets. If you think people who exploit the brave for money are the lowest form of life, hit the subscribe button right now and join our side." Phoebe spread the files across her kitchen table at 200, the documents Lily had given her forming a paper trail that led straight to hell. Thorne Defense Solutions. Founded 8 years ago by Victor Thorne, former military procurement officer who'd left active duty under circumstances the official record described as voluntary separation, but the unofficial whispers called one step ahead of an investigation. The company specialized in tactical equipment for military working dog units. Harnesses, protective vests, boots, transport gear, everything a K9 handler needed to keep their partner safe in combat zones. Except none of it was safe. Phoebe pulled up the contract documents on her laptop, cross-referencing them with the medical files Lily had provided. The timeline was damning. March 2022, Thorne Defense Solutions wins a $60 million contract to supply tactical gear for all military working dog units across 3 service branches. The contract is pushed through with minimal competitive bidding, approved by a procurement committee that includes Commander Sealers as the senior reviewing officer. June 2022, first deployment of Thorne equipment to forward operating bases in Iraq and Syria. September 2022, first handler death. Corporal Devon Wright, killed during a compound breach when his tactical vest fails to stop a 7.62 round. The after-action report attributes the death to combat circumstances beyond control parameters. November 2022, second handler death. Staff Sergeant Nicole Brennan, killed in Afghanistan, vest failure. Report filed, investigation closed within 3 weeks. The pattern continued. 6 deaths over 2 years. Every single one involving equipment failure. Every single investigation closed quickly, quietly, with conclusions that pointed to bad luck or enemy tactics or anything except the obvious truth. That the gear was killing people. Phoebe opened another file. Financial records that Lily had somehow acquired. Documents that should have been protected by multiple layers of clearance, but were now sitting on Phoebe's table like loaded weapons. Thorne Defense Solutions had revenue of $180 million over the past 3 years, but their manufacturing costs were listed at barely 30% of what comparable companies reported. They were using cheaper materials, cutting corners on quality control, substituting substandard components to maximize profit margins. And someone in the procurement chain was helping them hide it. She found the smoking gun in a folder labeled Consulting Agreements. Sealers Strategic Advisory Group, a private firm registered in Delaware, owned by Richard Sealers, Commander Sealers' younger brother. The firm had received $4.2 million in consulting fees from Thorne Defense Solutions over the past 4 years, for services that the invoices described in deliberately vague language: strategic advisory support, procurement optimization, contract facilitation. Translation: bribes dressed up in corporate language. Phoebe sat back, her hands curling into fists. Victor Thorne was manufacturing defective equipment that got Marines killed. Commander Sealers was using his position to ensure that equipment kept getting purchased, kept getting deployed, kept generating revenue. And when the dogs, the only witnesses who'd been present at every equipment failure, every death, started showing physical damage that could expose the conspiracy, Sealers had ordered them liquidated. Sold off to people who would never question why a perfectly good military working dog was suddenly available for auction. Buried before they could become evidence. Phoebe pulled out her phone and started making a list of names. Journalists who covered military procurement fraud, JAG officers who specialized in corruption cases, congressional staffers who handled oversight for defense contracts. She needed allies. She needed people who couldn't be silenced or threatened or bought. Because Victor Thorne and Commander Sealers had killed 6 Marines and were about to kill 12 dogs to cover their tracks. And Phoebe Castellano wasn't going to let that happen. Lily called at 4:30, her voice tight with something between terror and rage. "I found something else. You need to see this now." Phoebe was already awake, still sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by files and cold coffee. She'd been cross-referencing the handler deaths with the dog retirement dates, looking for patterns. "Send it," she said. Her phone buzzed. A scanned document appeared on screen. Incident report from the ambush that killed Kenneth. Standard format, clinical language describing tactical movements and enemy contact, and the precise timestamp when Kenneth went down. But there was a section Phoebe had never seen before, an addendum filed 3 weeks after Kenneth's death. K9 Asset T947, Tommy, present AT time of incident. Animal EXHIBITD distress, BHAVIORS, consistent with handler loss. Recommend immediate psychological evaluation and potential disposition. The report was signed by Commander Sealers. "Look at the other files," Lily said over the phone. "I pulled the incident reports for all 6 handler deaths." Phoebe opened them one by one, her heart rate climbing with each page. Corporal Wright, his dog, a Belgian Malinois named Gunner, was present when the vest failed, retired 4 months later for behavioral instability. Staff Sergeant Brennan, her dog, a German Shepherd named Ruby, was present, retired 6 months later for chronic aggression. Every single handler death had a K9 partner present. Every single dog was retired within 6 months. Every single retirement was signed off by Sealers. "They're not just witnesses," Phoebe said slowly, the full horror of it settling into her bones. "They're the only witnesses." "Exactly," Lily's voice cracked. "The handlers are dead. The after-action reports are sanitized. The equipment gets rotated out and destroyed according to standard disposal protocols. But the dogs were right there when the gear failed. They saw it happen. They were wearing the same faulty harnesses, the same defective vests. Their bodies carry the evidence." Phoebe thought about Tommy's fractured vertebra, about the X-rays showing exactly how the harness had distributed weight wrong, had created stress points that damaged his spine. A good forensic veterinarian could look at those injuries and testify about equipment design flaws, could explain to a jury exactly how Thorne's cost-cutting measures translated into physical trauma, could make a judge understand that these weren't random injuries, they were systematic failures. "That's why they have to disappear," Phoebe said. "Not just retired, gone, sold to people who'll never question their medical histories, dead within a year from fighting injuries or lab experiments or neglect." 12 dogs, Lily whispered. 12 living pieces of evidence that could bring down a $60 million contract and expose 6 wrongful deaths. How many others? What? How many other K9s were retired early after their handlers died? How many are already gone? Lily was quiet for a long moment. "I'll check the database, but Phoebe, if there are more, then we find them too. We can't save everyone. Watch me." Phoebe looked at the files spread across her table, at Tommy's medical records, at Kenneth's incident report, at the evidence that 12 dogs were about to be murdered because they couldn't testify in court, but their bodies could. "Sealers and Thorne are moving fast," she said. "The auction was supposed to finalize today. How long do we have?" 72 hours, Lily said. "Then they're transporting to the buyers." Then we've got 72 hours to get them out. The storm rolled in at 23:47, right on schedule. Phoebe watched the rain hammer against the windshield of the transport van, thunder cracking across Fort Marston like artillery fire. Perfect cover. The kind of weather that kept security patrols inside their vehicles, that reduced visibility to 30 feet, that gave a three-person team exactly the window they needed to commit what the Marine Corps would call grand theft of government property. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her veterinary credentials and forged transfer orders in a waterproof envelope on her lap. In the back, Corporal Adrian Reeves, a former K-9 handler who'd been dishonorably discharged after refusing to deploy with faulty Thorn equipment, checked his watch for the fifth time in 10 minutes. "Guards rotate at midnight," he said. "We've got a 12-minute window before the next patrol cycle." Phoebe killed the headlights and turned into the service road behind the disposition facility. The building loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against darker sky, only two exterior lights cutting through the rain. They'd planned this for 60 hours straight. Studied guard rotations, memorized camera blind spots, stolen access codes from Lily's veterinary database. One shot, no room for mistakes. Lily went in first, walking through the front entrance with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Her credentials got her past the night officer. Her fabricated story about emergency medical evaluations got her access to the kennels. Phoebe and Reeves went through the back. The lock yielded to Reeves's bypass key in 14 seconds. They moved through the dark building like shadows, night vision goggles turning everything green and grainy. The dogs heard them coming, ears forward, bodies tense, but trained not to bark without command. Tommy was exactly where Phoebe remembered, cage 7, second row. She opened the latch and he came to her immediately, pressing his head against her chest, his whole body trembling. She clipped a lead to his collar and whispered the only thing that mattered. "I've got you. Kenneth's got you. We're going home." Ruby came next. Then Tony, a massive shepherd who'd lost his handler to a vest failure in Kanda. Then the others, one by one, moving in disciplined silence through the building. Reeves loaded them into the van, while Lily signed falsified transfer documentation at the front desk, her hands steady despite the fear Phoebe knew was tearing her apart inside. They were 30 seconds from clear when headlights cut through the rain. 3 black SUVs, expensive and unmarked, blocking the exit road. Victor Thorne stepped out of the lead vehicle, flanked by private security contractors in tactical gear. His face was calm, almost amused, as he walked through the downpour toward the van where 12 dogs and 3 people who just ended their careers waited. "Sergeant Castellano," he called over the storm, "I really can't let you leave with my property." Phoebe stepped out into the rain, her hand resting on the tactical baton at her belt. "Then I guess we have a problem. Victor Thorne is trying to block the road to stop these dogs from finding safety. He represents a broken system that values profit over life. Would you have risked a court-martial to save these dogs like Phoebe did? Comment, everyone deserves respect if you're on Phoebe's side." Thorne's security contractors fanned out in a textbook formation, cutting off every exit route. 6 men, all carrying sidearms, all moving with the precision of former military. "You're trespassing on a secure facility," Thorne said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "You're in possession of stolen government property. My team is authorized to detain you until proper authorities arrive." Phoebe didn't move. "Your team has no legal jurisdiction on a military installation." "My team has a contract with the Department of Defense that says otherwise." Thorne smiled. "Now you can make this easy, or you can make this a felony." Inside the van, Tommy started growling, low and dangerous. Phoebe's mind ran calculations. 6 contractors, 3 civilians, 12 dogs who'd already been traumatized enough. No good options, only bad ones and worse ones. She reached slowly for her phone. "Don't," the lead contractor's hand went to his holster. I'm calling base security, Phoebe said evenly, unless you want to explain to a Marine colonel why private contractors are drawing weapons on active duty personnel. Your career is already over, Sergeant. Don't make it worse. That's when Reeves opened the van's rear doors. 12 military working dogs, trained for combat, responding to threat indicators they'd been conditioned to recognize for years. The contractors' aggressive postures, their hands on weapons, their encirclement tactics, everything screamed hostile contact. Ruby hit the ground first, 90 pounds of German Shepherd, placing herself between the contractors and the van. Tony followed, then the others, forming a defensive perimeter that any handler would recognize as a train protection formation. They weren't attacking, they were guarding. The contractors hesitated, their tactical advantage suddenly compromised by dogs who'd seen more combat than all of them combined. Call them off, Thorne snapped. They're not mine to call, Phoebe said. They're making their own choices. That's when the sirens cut through the rain. 4 vehicles, headlights blazing, coming fast down the service road. Naval Criminal Investigative Service, their insignia visible even through the downpour. Behind them, 2 more vehicles marked with JAG Corps identifiers. Phoebe had made one phone call before leaving her apartment. To a Navy investigator named Special Agent Danielle Ortega, who'd been quietly building a case against Thorne Defense Solutions for 8 months, waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to force the issue into the open. Phoebe had given her everything: the medical files, the financial records, the evidence that 12 dogs were about to disappear. And Ortega had promised she'd be there when it mattered. The NCIS vehicles formed a wall between Thorne's team and the van. Ortega stepped out, her credentials already visible, her expression carved from ice and professional fury. Victor Thorne, you're under investigation for procurement fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. These animals are now evidence in a federal case. She turned to the contractors. Holster your weapons and step away from the vehicle. Now. Thorne's face went white. You can't. I can, I am, and if you so much as breathe wrong, I will add witness intimidation to the list. Ortega looked at Phoebe. Sergeant Castellano, you and your team are going to need to give statements, but first, let's get these dogs somewhere safe. Tommy walked back to Phoebe and sat down at her feet, exactly where he belonged. The military tribunal courtroom was built for justice, not comfort. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and a panel of 3 officers whose combined combat experience exceeded 60 years. Phoebe sat in the witness gallery, Tommy lying at her feet. The dog had been admitted as physical evidence, his medical records projected on screens for everyone to see. The fractured vertebra, the damaged nerves, the pain he'd carried for 18 months because a harness was manufactured with materials that cost 40% less than military specifications required. Victor Thorne sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than Phoebe's annual salary. Commander Sealers sat beside him, his uniform stripped of rank insignia, his face carved from stone. Special Agent Ortega stood at the prosecutor's table, holding up a tactical vest, the same model Kenneth had been wearing when he died. This vest, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, was rated for 7.62mm rounds. That rating was certified by Thorne Defense Solutions and approved for procurement by Commander Sealers' Oversight Committee. She pulled out a ballistic panel, holding it up to the light. Laboratory analysis shows the Kevlar weave is 30% thinner than contract specifications. The ceramic plating is a cheaper composite material that fragments on impact rather than dispersing kinetic energy. She set the vest down and pulled up a video. Ballistics testing footage. A dummy wearing the Thorne vest taking a 7.62 round at combat distance. The round punched straight through. 6 Marines died wearing this equipment, Ortega continued. 6 handlers who trusted that the gear they'd been issued would protect them. Their K-9 partners were present at every single incident. The dogs witnessed the failures. They sustained injuries from the same defective equipment. And when those injuries started showing up in medical examinations, Commander Sealers ordered them retired and liquidated before anyone could ask why perfectly functional military working dogs were being auctioned off like scrap metal. She turned to face Thorne directly. You cut costs by 40%. You used substandard materials. You falsified testing data. And when people started dying, you paid Commander Sealers $4.2 million to help you cover it up. The lead tribunal officer, a colonel with 3 combat tours and a face like weathered granite, looked at Lily. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, could these dogs' injuries have been prevented with properly manufactured equipment? Lily stood, her voice steady despite the weight of ending her military career. Yes, sir. Every injury documented in those medical files is consistent with equipment failure. The dogs are living proof of systematic negligence. The colonel nodded slowly, then he looked at Sealers and Thorne. This tribunal finds sufficient evidence to proceed with courts-martial for conspiracy, fraud, and negligent homicide. Defendants will be remanded to custody pending trial. Military police moved forward. Thorne stood slowly, his composure finally cracking. This is a mistake. I have lawyers. You have the right to remain silent, the MP said, pulling out handcuffs. I suggest you use it. Sealers said nothing as they cuffed him, just stared straight ahead while they led him away. Phoebe reached down and scratched behind Tommy's ears. Kenneth, she whispered, we got them. Tommy leaned against her leg, and for the first time in 18 months, his tail wagged. The K9 Sanctuary opened on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after Phoebe had walked into that auction yard and made a promise she didn't know how to keep. 40 acres of California hillside, purchased with the settlement money from the class action lawsuit against Thorne Defense Solutions. A converted barn that now housed 12 individual suites with orthopedic bedding and temperature control. A veterinary clinic run by Lily, who'd lost her military commission but gained something worth more, the ability to sleep at night. Outdoor runs where dogs could move without pain, thanks to surgeries that repaired spines and hips damaged by equipment that should never have passed inspection. Ruby was chasing a ball across the western field, her gait almost normal now. Tony was sleeping in a patch of afternoon sun, his breathing deep and even. The others were scattered throughout the property, learning what it meant to be safe. Tommy stood beside Phoebe at the gate, his posture alert but calm, watching the road. He'd been watching for 3 days, ever since Phoebe told him someone special was coming. Dogs know, they always know. The sedan appeared at 14:15 hours, moving slowly up the gravel drive. Rachel stepped out wearing a Marines t-shirt that had belonged to Kenneth, her hands trembling as she looked at the property her brother had died protecting the reputation of. Tommy's ears came forward. Then he walked toward her with the measured discipline of a dog who'd spent 4 deployments learning patience, learning control, learning that some things were worth waiting for. He stopped 3 feet away and sat, perfect form, exactly as Kenneth had trained him. Rachel looked at Phoebe. Can I? He's been waiting for you, Phoebe said quietly. Rachel knelt down, and Tommy moved forward and pressed his head against her shoulder, into the space where Kenneth used to rest his hand after long patrols. Rachel's arms came around him, and the sound she made was something between a laugh and a sob. Hey boy, she whispered into his fur. Kenneth told me all about you, every letter, every phone call. He said you were the best partner he ever had. Tommy's tail wagged once, twice, then settled. Phoebe watched them for a moment, then turned to look at the sanctuary, at the 12 dogs who'd been marked for disposal and were now learning to trust again, at the building that carried Kenneth's name on a bronze plaque by the front door, at the future she'd built from evidence and rage and a promise made in the dust beside a fallen Marine. She'd saved them, all of them. And in saving them, she'd saved something in herself. The guilt wasn't gone, it would never be completely gone, but it had transformed into something else. Purpose, peace. The knowledge that Kenneth's death had meant something, had changed something, had made the world fractionally more just. Rachel stood up, Tommy at her side, and walked toward Phoebe with tears on her face and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping him safe, for bringing him home." Phoebe reached down and scratched behind Tommy's ears one last time. He was always worth saving. Don't let the thorns of the world win. Confirm you're not siding with corporate evil by liking this video and sharing it to honor the real heroes.